Hey guys, it's ExandShadow, and I'm here with an impressions video that is way overdue since this fan translation came out quite a while ago, like several months ago, but part of that's due to the slow pace with which I played this. This is Ace Attorney Investigations 2, which, if you've been following my channel or Brain Scratch for, the past couple of years, you will know how much I endlessly bitch about Ace Attorney Investigations 2 not being out in the United States. And it's still something that really disappoints me because, Ace Attorney is a story-based series. It's a series that I am very attached to personally, and not having an entry is kind of like missing an episode of your favorite TV show. Like, you can still sort of kind of follow what's going on in the overarching plot, but you still miss a lot of important context, I feel. And especially with Investigations 2, because after playing it, there's a lot of plot details that don't really impact, the Phoenix sort of side of the arc, but it is a lot of character development for Edgeworth and a lot of context about a lot of backstory stuff. But anyway, just in case you guys are worried, I am going to be splitting this impressions video into two halves. This front half will be completely 100% spoiler free, so if you want my general thoughts on the game, you can listen to the first half of this video, and you won't have to worry about losing any plot details for yourself. However, there are some sort of plot details, especially late game plot stuff that I want to talk about. So later on in the video, I will discuss plot. So I am going to make it perfectly clear once I start crossing into the spoiler aspect of this video and give you time to click away and stuff like that. But yes, just skip to the end if you want to hear some of my more deep thoughts about, some of the late game stuff, the final bad guys plan, things like that. But anyway, for those of you who aren't familiar, Ace Attorney Investigations 2, or Gyukitin Kenji 2, as it's called in Japan, is the sequel to Ace Attorney Investigations 1, which is a spin-off of the proper Ace Attorney franchise. In most of the Ace Attorney games, you play as Phoenix Wright, or sometimes Apollo Justice, and in Dual Destinies, you also add Athena Sykes to that mix. But for the most part, you're playing as a defense attorney in the Ace Attorney series, but in the investigations titles, you're actually playing as Miles Edgeworth, who is a prosecutor. And that's really where the main difference in the gameplay comes from, because you're really not in the courtroom for most of the investigations titles. You're on the crime scene before anybody's even been arrested, and you're trying to find out the clues and find the right culprit, as opposed to in the main Ace Attorney series where somebody's already been arrested and you're trying to prove that they didn't actually do it. And I think that it's a nice change, especially because I think that the investigation series always has had better investigation segments than the main 1 through 3 Apollo Justice and Dual Destinies games. And part of that is because in the main series, basically what the investigation segments were like is that you just go from place to place, you'd talk to a couple of witnesses, occasionally you'd poke around first person static screen. And well, those segments were all right to me, and they also had some of the most hilarious hidden dialogue in like all of video games. Something that always bugged me is that they're kind of dull at points, and they can drag on for a really long time. And the investigating really isn't all that involved for the most part. So I really like the way that they handle investigation in the investigations games, because instead of having the first person perspective for those points, you have your own character sprite, and you can move around a crime scene and investigate things closer, find different stuff. It's just a lot more detailed, gameplay wise, than the investigating in the other games. And that's why I like it so much. And it's actually kind of disappointing for me that they dropped this mechanic when they moved to Dual Destinies on the 3DS, but that's not a huge deal. But it is a lot of fun. I actually look forward to the investigation points of these games, which is weird because in nearly every other Ace Attorney games, you're kind of pushing through the investigation segments to get to the trials. So, it's a nice change of pace to have both the confrontation segments and the investigation segments be sort of about equal in quality, which is, something that can be said about very few other Ace Attorney games. And yes, the investigating in Investigations 2 is just as good as it was in Investigations 1. So, I'm glad about that. Uh, yeah, the character art is still great. I love the investigation sprites in general. But one thing that has always bugged me, and this is a nitpick, but The way that Investigations does its sprites is that you've got them at sort of a three-quarters angle, and Edgeworth is always facing towards the right, and most of the other characters are facing towards the left. So, they're sort of face to face and they talk for the most part, and that works. However, whenever a character is then put onto the other side of the screen, instead of making a new sprite for them, they just sort of flipped it, like they reversed it. And that means that since a lot of these characters have asymmetrical character designs, suddenly Kay's key in her hair is facing the wrong way, and Gumshoe has the pencil on the wrong side of his wrong ear, and that even gets worse with other characters who have like their hair suddenly flips to the other side or something ridiculous like that. And I know I can't complain too much because having to draw an entirely different sprite for both sides would take forever. So I can't really complain too much on that front, but it is just a pet peeve of mine that has always bothered me, especially since otherwise the investigation sprites are just so clean, so well animated. They're great. I love the investigations artwork, except for that one little issue, and it just drives me nuts. But, other than that, the graphics in this game are pretty much on par with the graphics from Investigations 1, which were great. So, not too much of a complaint there. The soundtrack, which is always something that I look forward into in an investigations game because this series has never had a bad soundtrack. Like the worst it ever got was for me Apollo Justice, and even then, nothing in that game's really bad except for the guitar serenade. I hate that song. But most of the time in Apollo, it was just sort of forgettable. Nothing really bad. This series has never had a bad soundtrack, and I am happy to say that Investigations 2 does not disappoint in the soundtrack department. I wouldn't say that it's one of my favorites, though. I still think that Investigations 1 soundtrack is one of the best in the series, and that's hard to top. I think it's about on par with in Dual Destinies, I think, though. So, there are a couple of tunes that sort of drop in my mind after they're done playing, but I hum along with most of the music as it's playing in the game. And, there are still quite a few tracks that stick with me after I turn it off. Particularly, the credits theme is absolutely fantastic. I love the theme for Logic Chess, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And yeah, it's just the I'm trying to think of something else that pops up to me. Oh yeah, a lot of the character themes are really good too. I'm glad that those ended up being okay. I think probably the biggest disappointment for this is the investigation tunes, which didn't really stick with me all that much. And while the confrontation presto themes and pursuit themes are both great, I still think that they fall short to investigations one. So, oh well. Again, trying to compare Ace Attorney's soundtrack is like trying to compare the number one and the number two. It's just like they're all so close that, when it comes to picking favorites, a lot of it's just personal preference. But anyway, when it comes to the gameplay in Investigations, just in general, they did add a new feature that I was originally very skeptical about, and that was logic chess. And I was skeptical because I had no idea how it was going to work when I was looking at the trailers. And so, I'm actually really glad to say that I enjoyed the logic chess sections quite a bit. I wasn't expecting to. I was expecting them to kind of just be sort of a throwaway little feature that they added just to make it kind of different from the original investigations. But I think it's actually, the logic chess sections are some of the strongest points in the game. And I was actually wishing that there were more of them. So, I wouldn't mind them bringing back something similar to that in future Ace Attorney titles. I think it's a really strong mechanic, Definitely a lot more interesting than stuff like the Mood Matrix or Apollo's bracelet thingy. But anyway, basically how the logic test works is that you sometimes get to points in the game where you basically just have no evidence to talk your way out of a situation. And so you just go into sort of a logic chess match against whoever you're talking to and try to prove whatever they're saying is wrong or try to like extract a secret out of them or something like that. And it's really fun for me because it really makes you think about your words as opposed to just trying to trial and error your way through a section with evidence, which you can sometimes do in the Ace Attorney in the Ace Attorney games. Now, basically how it works is that you'll have the opponent will have a number of chess pieces up in front of them. So let's say that they have two chess pieces in front of them. That means that there are going to be like two phases to that round of logic chess. And in the first round, let's say you need to prove that they are at the crime scene or whatever. So you'll just sort of go back and forth, trying to argue logical points with them. And how that happens is that, it'll say, like, prove that he was at the crime scene. And then you'll be given a list of 3 different dialogue choices to say. And you're also on a timer whenever you need to make a choice. So you really have to sort of think quickly about which choice will be the best one to go with. And sometimes you'll just be wrong and a part of your timer will go away and then you got to pick again. But let's say you pick the right one, then you'll have some more dialogue and then you'll be given a choice to either say one thing to him, say another thing to him, or wait and see. And again, it makes you really think about what you need to say, and you're also on the timer, so you need to do it quickly. And I think that's part of why I like the logic test so much. It's because, it's just a really interesting way to add to the logic mechanic, which in Investigations 1, I wasn't too big on. I mean, it was all right, but it really ended up being pretty simple so much. Victim had bullet in gut. Found gun on crime scene. I wonder how they died. It was mostly just stuff like that. But the logic test, really strong mechanic. I had a lot more fun with it than I was probably expecting to. So yeah, I'm really glad that happened. Now, however, I'm going to talk about something that I really want to sort of bring up because I'm kind of conflicted upon how harsh I want to be on this point because, as you probably know, I'm playing this through a fan translation. This game was never officially brought over to the United States. And for the most part, I really do need to praise the fan translators on this because I think, considering the situations, they did a pretty admirable job. They didn't just translate all the text. In the investigations games, there's a lot of points where, like, there's important, like, words on, like, graphical art, in sprite art that need to be translated and stuff like that. So it actually makes a lot of sense why the Investigations 2 never came over, because it's a lot harder of a translation job than just putting the entire thing into Babelfish and shipping it out real quick. They really do have to work really hard on both the translation, adding it into the game, and the localization. So really want to praise the translation and localization team for really going above and beyond the Call of Duty here. Like, they translated all the names to have sort of punny Ace Attorney style names. Like, for example, it's not really a spoiler that one of the early cases has you investigating in a prison, and one of the characters you meet in there is called J. Bird or Jailbird, which is just a classic Ace Attorney pun, and I love that they added that sort of stuff into the game, which is great. Um, However, I don't think it's quite Capcom levels of localization when it comes to the text. And, I'm really trying to give the localization team a lot of slack because they did do a really, really good job, but I just feel like it doesn't quite match the quality of a Capcom localization. It's just kind of like, to me, it almost felt like I was reading the game through, like, anime subtitles, if that makes any sense. And, I don't want to knock any points against the translating team at all because they worked so hard on this, and they finally gave me a game, the ability to play a game that I've been wanting to play for years and years and years. But it's part of me just really wants to see how Capcom would localize the game and see if they could do a better job, or if maybe the localization team really did do about as good of a job as Capcom could have. But yeah, that's just one thing that really ate at me is that the localization just wasn't quite up to snuff. And again, I'm really not trying to knock down on the localization team. It's like comparing a B to an A, honestly. So, I honestly, compared to a lot of like AAA localization jobs I've seen, it's actually pretty damn great. But I set really high standards for Ace Attorney. It's one of my, if not my, all-time favorite series. So, I'm just really nitpicky about that. And another nitpicky thing that is, again, out of the localizer's control is that I really didn't enjoy playing this game on an emulator. And now I think that you can play the game on a flash card and then play it on your normal DS, but I don't own one. So I did have to stick with an emulator, and that wasn't really comfortable for two reasons. One, slowdown. There was a lot of slowdown on my emulator, and I did try to upgrade to the most recent version of Desmame, and I still got a pretty decent amount of slowdown, which was annoying. And also, I can't play Ace Attorney anywhere but in my bed. Um, it's just one of those things where I have such fond memories of playing Ace Attorney 1, 2, and 3 at like 4 o'clock in the morning on a school night in my bed. So, I can't really play Ace Attorney any other way. It's just wrong for me, especially when I'm hunched over my laptop. So, again, not the game's fault, not the localizer's fault, but that's a significant chunk of why it took me like a month and a half to play through the entire game. Normally with Ace Attorney, when I can just play it in my bed or lying on the couch or something like that, I'm done in at least a week. Yeah. But anyway, that's just generally my thoughts about the game as a whole in non-spoilerly terms. So, if you're an Ace Attorney fan, the Investigations 2 fan translation is definitely worth your time because I don't think that they're ever going to bring the game officially over to the US. But again, if you are going to play it, I recommend getting a flash card and downloading it onto that so that you can play it on your regular DS because emulators just can't run the game very well for whatever reason. It's not like Ace Attorney is that graphically intensive, but whatever. But anyway, now I'm going to start transitioning into spoilery sort of talk, so I'm going to wait a couple of seconds for you guys to be able to click off the video if you want, because, I really don't want to spoil anything for an Ace Attorney fan. That's like the absolute worst thing you can do in this series, so I'm just going to wait for 5 seconds and then go onto the spoiler talk. Ha! I only waited 4 seconds. Just kidding. Anyway, now, one thing that I do like about Ace Attorney Investigations 2, story-wise, is that they actually implemented, like, a game-long arc and theme to it, and that's basically the theme of parents and their children and how they interact. And I actually really like that because very few video games sort of have overarching plot lines like that. And the last Ace Attorney game that I can remember that had like a sort of more subtle overarching plot line like that was Justice for All, with Phoenix trying to learn how he was, what being a lawyer meant specifically to him. So I really like that they implemented that. It got a little bit ham-handed in the fifth case, where they go like really out of their way to show how close the everybody is with their parents and how they're similar and how they're different. Because like through cases 1 through 4, I thought it was like a really subtle, nice theme that I only barely touched upon. But then they just sort of kind of overdid it in the fifth case. But again, I'm not going to take away too many points for that. I guess they just really wanted to hammer it home, and seeing as most games don't even try to do something like that, I can cut some slack about that. Another thing I really loved about this game is that every single case was important, and you can't even begin to imagine how great that was for me. Because even the best Ace Attorney games, the original 3, had points where some cases just didn't impact anything at all. And like the first game, you had the third case with the Steel Samurai, and even though I love that case and it's great and it has lots of awesome character development, you can go straight from case 2 to case 4 and you don't really miss an awful lot. Yeah, in fact, that's what they did in the Ace Attorney movie, and that ended up being pretty darn great too. In Ace Attorney not in Ace Attorney yeah, in Ace Attorney Investigations, most of the cases had a connection, but they were kind of weak there. Justice for All, there was Turnabout Big Top, which I know a lot of people hate. I personally don't have too many issues with it, but and then you've got Ace Attorney Trials and Tribulations, where cases 2 and 3, aside from introducing characters, really don't have anything to do with anything. And don't get me wrong, Trials and Tribulations is probably my favorite out of all of them. But I just really like how Investigations 2 made every single case matter. Like, really, really matter. Like, it's all one big story, which is just great. Another thing that I really like is that all the cases are a lot more involved than normal. Like, they've got the brief tutorial section at the beginning where they just go over the mechanics just in case it happens to be your first Ace Attorney game. But for the most part, the first case is, like, really, really long. Like, it kicks the crap out of the first game's first case, like the first investigation game's first case, in length. Like that case can be done in like an hour, and it took me like 3 or 4 to beat the first case in Investigations 2. It's just super. I just like how they, decided, okay, most of the people who are going to be playing this have heard of Ace Attorney, so there's no need to handhold them. We can just jump straight into it, and that was great. I loved that. I actually wish that more games in the series would do that instead of feeling the need to dumb down everything at the beginning. Because at this point, if you played, and if you're going to buy an Ace Attorney game, you've played at least one of them before. You have to at this point. It's such a plot-heavy series that if you don't play them in order, I honestly think that you're not doing it right. But yeah, I loved that so much. However, one thing that I don't really like about Ace Attorney Investigations 2 is how convoluted the plot can get. And now I made this complaint when I talked about Dual Destinies, where they sort of overcomplicated the murder plots in order to just have bullshit puzzles. But I don't think that they did that really in Ace Attorney Investigations 2. For the most part, the crimes themselves are relatively simple, which is what I like. It's just a relatively simple crime, and the clues make sense for the characters' motivations. I like that. I think the crimes themselves were set up. It's just everything is. I was talking about how I loved how all the cases were interconnected, but I think that they maybe went a little bit too far on that point because, like, it's such a mess by the time you get to the fifth case, where the main bad guy, Simon Keyes, he told his friend Knightley how to set up a fake assassination plot, but then he hired a real assassin because reasons, and then he was able to have the warden kill Knightley with a because he was interacting with an assassin. It just gets really, really complicated, and to the point where it's somewhat hard to follow. And that might have something to do with the localization. I'm not sure. I don't know Japanese, so I haven't played the original game in order to compare it. But yeah, it's just a little bit too complicated for its own good, and it can get a little bit frustrating on that front. But it's nothing that you can't really handle. I think it's just it's a little bit too messy. I think that they could have gone out of their way to make it a little bit more streamlined. Um, yeah, I like most of the new characters in the game. I really love Raymond Shields. He is just a hilarious character, and I think that he really sort of, I think he really gels with the Ace Attorney universe, and I really hope to see more of him in upcoming games. DeBess. I love, oh man, I can't remember. It's not Simon DeBest, is it? Oh man, I can't. It's really going to bother me if it what his name is now, because it's really. Oh man, is it Simon? It can't be Simon the Best, can it? No, it's not Simon. I'm thinking of Simon Blackwell. The best Ace Attorney. Hold on, I'm doing a Google. Sebastian. Oh, okay, Sebastian the best. I am talking about how much I like this character and I can't remember his name. I really like Sebastian the best, not only because he's hilarious, but also because I think he has one of the best character arcs in the entire story. Justine Courtney, she's an okay character. Not too attached to her, but she's pretty good. But the best has like an incredible character arc, I think, especially since the last logic chess game in the last logic chess section is not you trying to get information necessarily you trying to get information out of the best, but it's you trying to like give him confidence in order to become a better person, and I just absolutely loved that. And they sort of establish in the middle of the final case that he's not perfect, he's still sort of wet behind the ears, but he really did try the entire time, which is something I really love. The character, he was kind of a dickwad early on, but he really was trying his absolute best, even if he didn't succeed a lot of the time. So loved his character. One character I didn't really like, however, was his father, Blaze the Best. And that's not necessarily just because I think he's a bad villain. I think he's a great villain, honestly. Like, he's super intimidating. It was really satisfying to take him down. But one thing that really bothered me is that in the third, they established that he is basically the one who forged the evidence in the case that Gregory and Von Karma were in that led to the DL6 incident, and that really, really bothered me because it makes Von Karma almost non-important. And I get that they wanted to make this guy like the guy behind everything that set Ace Attorney in motion, but I don't think they needed to do that. I think that, they didn't have to add that point in there. They just sort of did because reasons. They just sort of wanted to. I think it would have been better for the plot if Von Karma were just forged evidence on his own. You know, that's just what he does. I feel it just sort of undermined Von Karma a little bit there to have, an even worse prosecutor than him. Because Von Karma, really, when you think about it, is the start of all the crap that happens in most of the Ace Attorney games. So, I feel like undermining him is just sort of like undermining, I don't know, like Ganon in The Legend of Zelda or something. I don't know. If you get what I mean there. But yeah, I think really though, I think the most disappointing final bad guy is just Simon Keys, because I did like the fact that they were sort of pulling a mini on guard with the character that we trusted ended up becoming evil. I did like that aspect to him, but I'm not really a fan of the evil clown motif. That's just a personal thing, and also I just felt that I did like the fact that he was a character that got really screwed over. I feel like he had just the right amount of sympathetic and douchebaggery mixed together. I think that was a really good mix, but just I feel like his they sort of like overplayed his sort of puppet master ness, and also it was really frustrating at the end of the game because he admits to kidnapping John Marsh, and you can't really do anything like that. He's just like, oh, I can walk out of here anytime I want because you can't prove anything, even though he admits to kidnapping. That just really bothered me. But yeah. Overall, though, I do think that Ace Attorney Investigations 2 did have a really strong story. I think overall, I would probably rank it pretty close to Investigations 1. I think it's probably a better game than Dual Destinies when I think about it. But, it's just, I still don't think it can quite reach the levels that the original trilogy had for me. And, that's just me with my obnoxiously high expectations and, my absolute fanboy love for the first three games. Those are some of my absolute favorite games of all time. And the fact that they're putting all three of them downloadable on the 3DS is just going to get me so pumped. I can take those with me anywhere I want. That's going to be great. But Investigations 2 is definitely worth your time if you're an Ace Attorney fan. It's definitely a great time, and I really, really enjoyed it. So, yeah, that's about it for me. Just a recommendation. I probably should have said this earlier because I doubt most of the people are going to listen all the way to the end. But please try not to discuss spoilers in the comments. That's just kind of a dick move. But anyway, that's about it for me. I'm ExandShadow, and I'll see you guys later.